Hello, story seekers. I'm Nico.
I'm Ben, and you're listening to The Tiny Bookcase.
Our guest for this episode was born in Iran and raised in the North of England. He's an award-winning fantasy author and has written 2 trilogies, The Age of Darkness and The Age of Dread, plus a prequel novella set in the magic-infused world of Modana.
His latest novel, The Judas Blossom, is the first instalment in a Persian-inspired historical fantasy trilogy. We would like to warmly welcome Stephen Aryan.
Hello, thank you for having me.
Lovely to have you. I have to say, one of the things that we just had a conversation before this, before we started recording about a certain bit of cover art, but your cover art for Judas Blossom really just jumps off the page, the shelf, the yeah. Did you have any input on that?
Great name.
Yes.
As well.
Yeah, fantastic name.
Yeah, I didn't put on all my covers, and this one more than any of the others. I wanted it to get it right. I wanted it to have the right feel. So straight away, I was talking to the designer and with my editor about it. The cover designer is Sarah O'Flaherty, and she absolutely nailed it. I basically sent her like a Pinterest board of, these are the kind of things I'm thinking. These are things from the story. These are particular colors that are very pertinent to Persia and history, and there's certain themes in the books, and the kind of mandalas, which are kind of quite common in the artwork over there. And she tied all of the things together perfectly, and I absolutely love it. And the artwork for the second book has now come out, and it's just brilliant again. So I think these are probably my favorite covers to date, to be honest.
It's really cool to know that much care is being taken. Isn't it? Over like that much attention to detail is spot on.
And input as well, I think. Like, you often hear about authors not getting to have too much to do with it, but that's fantastic that you got to do that. You mentioned mandalas. I know from at least from a Jungian perspective, that mandalas are sometimes used as a kind of like they're used in psychoanalysis or even like meditation. Have you ever done that where you draw your own mandala in order to focus your mind on something?
Not for meditation purposes, no. I just quite admire them as something to do with the artwork, and they're used quite a lot in some Persian artists use it. So I thought it was appropriate to have it in the cover.
It's really great. So the cover question aside, what's your go-to ale? Because I saw on your website that you are a drinker of craft beers.
Yes, over the last years, I've gradually worked out what I like and don't like. I can't tell you about wine. I can't tell you about whiskey. Beer is my thing. So I like pale ales that aren't fruity. If I want fruit in it, I'll have fruit salad. I don't want citrus and grapefruit and any of that in my beer. No, thank you. I like a pale ale that's quite nice. But my go-tos are darks, porters, stouts. Something like that I really like. Just 4, 5, 6%, a nice pale, nice dark beer. That's kind of my thing. Yeah.
I'd like to know more, but I'm more down the sort of wine end of things. But the you can always tell a true beer connoisseur if they're into porters and more dark beer, I think, because I'm not really into that. Like I have a Guinness every now and again. Like we went on Nico's stag do last year in Dublin, and we drank a lot then. But I like to be safe. I like my IPAs.
Fair enough.
I've got to ask: have you hit that point yet where you find a flavour that you like? So, for example, I like a peaty whiskey, but when we were in Ireland, we had a whiskey that tasted like you were eating someone's fire pit because it was so smoky and peaty. Have you found a beer that's so far into like stout and porter, like it'd be like licking Bovril straight out of the jar? Have you reached that point yet?
I haven't got to that point where I think, this is really good. I could have 4 of these, but occasionally I'll have one that is quite strong, like a 12%. Like a friend bought me some for Christmas, and they're sort of really special ones. I won't say what brand they are, but they're kind of like 10, 12%. I'm thinking, that's a really special evening drink. That's not, I'll have that and have a couple more whilst watching a film. It's like, no, you have that. And then you sit down and think about what you've done for a few hours. Have a rest and a couple of pints of water. I mean, 12, 16% beer, that's full on flavor. That's probably too much, to be honest. It kind of drifts almost, it can get into that medicinal thing and it gets too strong in a beer. So, yeah. It's a rare beauty.
Nico and I went to university in Cambridge. We didn't go to Cambridge, we went to university in Cambridge. But the one of the biggest beer festivals in the UK takes place on one of the parks that we have in Cambridge. And they always have some crazy strong beers there. So if you haven't been, I would fully recommend it, because that is probably the best beer festival in the country.
Okay, all right.
Yeah, but maybe on to some storytelling. Should we,
okay, yeah. Enough beer talk.
Should we dive in? So, do you want to ask the first one, Nico, or shall I?
Oh, I may as well. What is the first story you wrote that meant something to you, Stephen?
Oh, that's a good question. I don't know, actually. I've been writing ever since I was very, very young, writing stories. It started with imitation. It started with fan fiction. It started writing my own versions of other books that I read. It's the first one that mattered to me. I don't know. Probably the first novel I finished. Probably.
Okay. I was just going to say, while you're mulling on it, what was your fan fiction route? Where did you write?
Who were you copying?
So like a lot of people, I did read Tolkien, and that was probably the first thing I went to, The Hobbit. But I then, so the equivalent, we would probably call it YA now, but it didn't exist as that then. So like David Eddings, I would classify now as a YA fantasy book.
100%, yes.
Like, the Belgariad, the Malorian, those were my kind of, I absolutely love these. These are the right age for me. When I was 10, 11, 12, I was reading it and I got, 90% of everything in the book I understood. But going back and reading them like 10 years later, I'm thinking, it's very black and white. It's really simplistic. So I'd probably written some Garian fan fiction, and then as I got older, I read Terry Brooks, and I'm sure I've got a Shannara, a bit of fan fiction out there somewhere. Dragonlance. There'll be like I'm sure I did a Minotaur story based upon the Dragonlance books, because we didn't get a lot of them in the first few books, and I always loved Minotaurs from Greek mythology, and I thought I want to see more of them. So I think I wrote my own version of that. Some kind of, I'm got this huge novel, and then it was about 10 pages. But it was the thought that counts.
I think that's absolutely fascinating. That's that start of like going in, knowing who you like and what you're enjoying, and then blossoming from that point. So what was the first thing that you wrote that you felt like was you stepping beyond that, like into your own style, that felt like your voice?
It's a good question. I think when I first started doing novels, I hadn't found my voice yet. So it took me a long time to get picked up by an agent. And I think part of the problem was I didn't have the experience, I didn't have the skill, but also I wasn't writing in my own voice. I was writing in a version of what I thought it should be that was based upon other people. So in a way, it was kind of fan fiction without realizing it was done in the style of, or a version of, and I didn't understand that because I was still kind of stumbling forward. So the other side of the stuff that I read growing up beyond fantasy was things like Stephen King. I read a lot of Stephen King. So there's a touch of and Lovecraft and Dean Koontz, and there's elements of all of those things in my books now for those who can see them. But I think I started writing stuff that was just too much a flavor of them. Even like Anne Rice, I wrote like a bunch of vampire short stories and stuff in my late teens because I was reading a lot of her books then. I don't even know which book it was, but at some point when I was writing my own books, my own fantasy ones, I wrote something, and my friends and family read it first. They were my beta readers, and they said, this actually doesn't sound like, the character doesn't sound like you, or that character doesn't sound like so and so, or that character no longer sounds like your brother. Because when you first write, you're just creating versions and copies of people and places and experiences, and then after a while begin to just kind of create it whole cloth. And then when people start saying, I'm not seeing you or people that we know in the book anymore, that's when it probably became a book that I probably thought, maybe there is something there.
I love that idea of losing like it's almost like an ego death, isn't it?
Yeah.
You sort of losing yourself in whatever you're writing, and that's where you find your voice. Sort of you've got to take 2 steps back to go 3 steps forwards, kind of situation.
I would take the combination of all of those things, though. If you do decide you're going to write something about a vampiric hobbit with an alcohol problem in Maine, I am going to be fully on board for it.
Don't forget the eddings. So we're going to need like a big knight with a broken nose in there somewhere. Just...
Yeah. This is it. I mean, the thing is, right? That I make jokes about fantasy, and I say basically it's the ultimate cheat code. But I kind of believe it too, that I can write any kind of story that I want, and as long as I have certain pieces in place, it'll still sit firmly within the fantasy genre. And I've done that on my own books. Like, it's not that I snuck it in under my editor's nose. They knew what the story was. Some people come into the books and go, oh, it's not what I was expecting. I'm like, I know. That was kind of the point. I wanted to do something different on purpose.
Yeah, who wants to read or watch or listen to anything that they were expecting, like in the first instance? Like, fair enough if you like it and want to reread it, then.
Yeah.
But that seems like a very dull way to live one's life, to never be surprised by new things.
Chris Arrocchio has this thing about genres, how he hates that the more and more genres we have, they kind of put people into smaller and smaller boxes. And I kind of agree with him to an extent, because it's helpful in one way. It's helpful for marketing. It's helpful for bookshops and stuff. But also it's kind of detracting from the joy of what fantasy is, which was a lot more of discovery. Like, I know you don't want to pick a book and spend money on it and you don't like it, and that's quite upsetting. You don't want to keep doing that over and over again. So I understand it from that aspect. But from the other side, I agree with Christopher, where he says fantasy used to cover the whole gamut from H.P. Lovecraft all the way through to, the Conan novels, to anything in between. Remember, because when they were friends growing up, H.P. Lovecraft and the guy who wrote Conan, whose name is thank you, Howard, they were pen pals and part of this inner kind of group of 5 or 6 authors that wrote to each other and were communicating, and everything that they wrote came under the banner of fantasy. So you could pick up a novel and you could get something horrific, cosmic horror from space, or you could get something about an epic barbarian bludgeoning his way across a continent. And I love that kind of feel of it. So I sort of fudge the edges a little bit on my books in honor of that, but also I think it can be a bit distracting that people just pick up a thing and go, oh, he's expecting it to be this. Like you say, they go, oh, it's not what I was expecting. I'm like, well, that isn't an expectation of the marketing. That was what you thought it was going to be. So there's a lot of back and forth and conversations I think publishers have with authors about these things. And like when you pitch a book to an agent or an editor, they kind of need to know what it is so that they can sell it. You have to, part of the thing we say in query letters, they say is you have to have comp titles, comparison titles, so that the editor can say it's a bit of X and Y, which then tells finance people, okay, based upon our best guess, we think it'll sell X amount, therefore we'll take it on, we'll offer this much in the advance. And it's all, sounds very boring and it's all very annoying, but business is such an integral part of publishing business, or whether it's traditional or self-publishing, and I get it, but I still want the creative aspect to thrive. And I think the more boxes and smaller that we put fantasy in, the less surprises readers sometimes get.
That might actually be the best answer to that question, the initial question that we've ever had. I really enjoyed that. You absolutely set my mind on fire there with just why. Because I've done it myself, where I've started writing something, I'll be like, oh, this is a cyberpunk. And what you're doing there is technically writing to a marketing term rather than... Yes, there is like a set of things that goes with it. Yeah, no, that's really... I feel like that actually helped me, so thank you.
Good.
So on your work, where would you recommend that folks start reading your writing? And also, where should they buy it?
The best places is, if in the UK, go to local Waterstones, go to your local indie bookshop. If you don't have a local independent bookshop, go to hive.co.uk. order the books, and just before you check out, you can say roughly where you're based, and you can pick your nearest local bookshop, and they get a bit of the money. They get the order, and it costs pretty much the same as Waterstones. If in the US, definitely go to your Barnes and Noble. And then, Amazon is great. It is very, very powerful. But, we don't need to send any more of them into space or buy any more rockets. So while I appreciate what they do, and they do sell a lot more books than anybody else, I'd always say shop local. And, also go to your library, because I didn't know this until I became a traditionally published author, is that every time you borrow a book within the UK and Ireland, every author gets a couple of shekels. And every year we then get an annual statement that we're paid from the library and lending service in the UK. So I know books are a luxury, and obviously if you can't afford to buy them, I encourage people to borrow them from the library, because that still helps the author out.
Just say, do remember, if it's not in the library already, just ask them. Books can come, and then you get to help the author twice if they haven't got it yet.
Yeah, they can order it. You can order it in the libraries. It's quite, easy for them to do that, to get a copy in and stuff. And book clubs are great for that kind of thing through libraries. But as to where to start with my work, I'd go back to the beginning, only because they're all very different stories. So my first trilogy, I debuted in 2015. My first trilogy starts with Battle Mage, and this is the trilogy that's atypical in a lot of ways. Some people liked it, some people didn't, for some of the kind of the expectation things that we talk about. So the first book, Battle Mage, is I wrote it because I couldn't find a lot of what I wanted to see in a novel. So I wrote the book that I wanted to read, which is probably the best piece of writing advice I ever give to anybody, apart from finish the book, is write the book you can't find that you want to read. So I wanted a fantasy novel that was front and center weird, that was very, very obviously fantasy. I didn't want to get 200 pages in with people and armor and knights and princesses to then suddenly have a dragon wander past in the background. So I wanted overt magic. I wanted non-human races. I wanted weirdness and gods walking around as men. And so all of that went into that first book. And it's essentially, it's a war book. It's all about what becomes a first world war for this world that it's set in. And there are giant powerful mages. They're a dying breed in the book, but the idea of, if you have a war, you have some on one side and you don't have any on the other opposing army's side. The war is over because they can throw fireballs and pull down lightning and destroy the enemy army. So the idea is you kind of have to have that balance, but they are dying and they're few and far between. So that was very much that first book, and it is, you can't get any bigger. And I wasn't going to have an intergalactic war because I wasn't going to break that genre boundary. So the second book in the trilogy, Blood Mage, it carries on. It's set immediately after, but it has a different set of characters, but there are people in the background. And in the third book, it's different again, and people from the first two books and new people appear in the third book. But the second one is very much set around a city. It's about a serial killer. There are warring crime families. There's someone who's essentially a cop investigating stuff. There's subtle magic in it. There's non-human races. And so I just created this story all around one city. And then in the third book, Chaos Mage, this is basically, it's a post-apocalyptic horror set in a city on the edge of nowhere that's full of the dead. That's kind of like a nod to my people that I've said, like the Stephen Kings and the H.P. Lovecrafts. But it's very much a fantasy novel because there is people that we've seen from the first two books, and there is something that they have to do there to find out what's going on in this city. But it's all set within the same world, and so threads pull through from the first two books into this third one.
Would it be fair to say that it sounds like, with these interesting ways that you're pushing genre and you're pushing character and you're pushing bits of world building, that you were exploring whilst publishing?
I consciously wanted to do something different each time, and by starting with the World War, I couldn't go any bigger. And my editor read that first book and she's like, well, where are you going to go for the second one? I'm like, I have to go somewhere different. I'm not going to make it another big war. I've done that. Now I need to do something different. So I'm someone that likes to do something different every time. I never want to repeat myself in a book, because if it's boring for me to write, then it's more than likely it's going to be boring for people to read, which is my kind of mantra.
Incredible. Yeah, it sounds like you're so dialed into your own personal approach to your craft. It's really incredible to hear.
It took a long time to get to that place, I think. as well as learning how to write and how not to write my friends and family into books, it was to work out what I actually wanted to do. And by starting with an atypical trilogy, some people have loved it and said, oh, I wish it was one big story, all connected with the same characters, whereas some people were happy with that approach. Trilogy follows on 10 years after book 3, so in essence it's book 4, and that is one big story with the same characters all the way through. And then that you got the reverse. Some people saying, oh, it's all just one big story chopped into 3, and other people going, oh, I wish it was all seen up. I'm thinking it proves that you can't win with everybody, nor should you try to. Just write the story that you want to write, really.
Absolutely brilliant. Right, this is a real change of pace, so get ready for this one.
Yep.
So I want you to imagine that you're walking through, potentially there's a world war between mages happening. You're just wandering through an open glade. Maybe it's an old battlefield with like pock marks on it, and then suddenly above you, a light just snaps on, and there's a flying saucer, like a proper like sci-fi 60s saucer, and you are beamed up. The light shines, and gradually you can see some details, and before you is a small grey individual. Who speaks to you?
Hello. Do you hear me, human? Hello. Now, welcome aboard. I would like to make an offer to you. Either I will probe you, or you may offer me one book through which I would better understand you. And I do mean you personally.
Does it have to be one of my books?
It doesn't have to be.
It's probably better if it is.
Second-guessing yourself?
I'd probably offer you The Coward, which is one of my books. Yes.
Now, that sounds telling. I feel like I'm learning about you already.
Yes, I would say The Coward for reasons beyond the title that you probably don't expect. It tells a lot about me.
So what about the Coward would elucidate this alien?
I'd rather talk about the books and be probed. I'd done 6 books about mages and a novella, about big magic, and I had to do something different, and I wanted to do something that felt very different. So on the surface, it's a modern version of a quest novel with a character assembling a group of heroes and going off to an adventure. And I did that intentionally with a nod to the kind of books that I read that we've talked about growing up. But that's basically just the surface story. I had a lot of other things that were in my head that I'd been absorbing over the last few years before I wrote it. And I was exploring these things through the book. So it talks about a lot of things that were important or on my mind. And that probably is the one that's closest to me in some ways.
And where would that's really interesting. So where does that fit in with your view of writing the book that you want that hasn't been written yet? Like, did you feel that there was something about your personal experience that you needed to express?
Yes. So one question writers get asked a lot, and I know it's well intentioned, but it's kind of the most difficult and the easiest question to answer is, where do you come up with your ideas? And the answer is everywhere. That's basically it. So I wrote The Coward because I had been doing some non-fiction reading. I'd met some interesting people. I'd been looking at stuff in the news, in the media, and the book is talking about a lot of different things. So the main character essentially is someone who has PTSD, and it's the idea of what happens after a person has done the great thing, comes back from the adventure and has to go on living with their life, like a soldier or a journalist who's been at war and comes back. How do you then get on with the rest of your life? And the story is about that, and then what happens next when that person's summoned again to go on another adventure. But I was also talking and exploring things like celebrity culture and fake news and propaganda and just so many other things. And I hadn't really seen anything done like that in quite a while. So it's not preaching about these things, it's just exploring the ideas through the lens of this story about somebody being called back to be hero again after having gone through it once and been broken by it. And what does that do to a person? How do they recover? How do they go on living with their lives? And how do they cope if they're asked to do the same thing again? And so it's a really complicated book. There's lots of things going on under the surface, but some readers just don't see that. They just see the adventure story. And if they enjoyed it, then fantastic. But I think it's the book that I've written that you can reread the most because there's more stuff going on than people realize.
Would you say you had a sense then, after you were 6 books in, that maybe you were at the end of your main quest? Was that where it's rooted?
I think it just I felt like I'd done the big, loud magic stuff, and I had to do something different. I had to stretch different muscles, and this just felt like a very, very different approach. It was looking at things that I enjoyed growing up, but I wanted to push it beyond that. I mean, so David Gemmell is another one of my favorite authors that I read. I started reading when I was a teen. I met him once at a book signing before he passed away, and this was also a nod in some ways to him. And it's I actually got a friend of his and a new friend of mine, James Barclay, to read The Coward and see if he would give me a cover quote. And he was in the middle of moving house at the time, and he said, "I'll do my best, but I can't promise." And I said, "I understand, no problems." And he sat down to read it. And then like a couple of days later, got an email through from him saying, "You sod." I sat down and read it, and I finished it now. So he blasted through it and absolutely loved it. But he said he could absolutely see that it was a nod, and it has echoes of Gemmell. And he gave me a great cover quote for it. So I think I was
experience. What an incredible thing to do.
Yeah, nice. I think it was me stretching myself. I think it was me calling to things in the past, but it was also talking about things in the present that have been going on in the media and the news and society for the last 15, 20 years or so. So, I'm always pushing myself, really.
Well, thank you for your answer.
You're very welcome.
Wow. Do you know that? I'm leaving now.
You are dismissed, alien.
Please go.
There he goes.
Oh, fantastic! So when you've written your first draft of a book.
Mm-hmm. Yep.
What is your editing process?
Okay, so I plan my books. I sit somewhere on the planning spectrum of the scale, and so my first drafts tend to be quite tidy, quite solid. I'm not someone that has ever had to throw out huge chunks of the book. Some of my other friends who are authors do that. They write the book to work out what it is, and then they go back and chuck out things and rewrite it till they've got the story that they want. So my first drafts are usually fairly well polished. At that point, I'll then put it down for a while, let it rest at least a couple of weeks, a month if possible, so it marinates and you kind of forget little things. And then I go back and start working on it, and I'll do different passes through the novel. So I might do, just the first thing is a structural pass. Look at things like, does it have enough rise and fall? Are the character arcs happening as the way I want? Is the ending satisfying? Are there enough kind of hooks? Then there's things like pacing. Then I'll do like a dialogue pass. Then I'll do just a character pass where I'll just pick, if it's more than one point of view, which most of my books are, I'll just read the chapters from that one character and follow them through and see who they are at the start and who they are at the end, and has it gone through the way I want it. So there's lots of different revisions rather than trying to do everything all at once, because I think that doesn't work. It doesn't work for me, at least. I know some people just work through, but I find it easier to focus on one thing at a time and do different passes.
That sounds very smart to me.
It sounds extremely streamlined, is how I'd say it. Like it feels like you have this process down.
It's something I've developed over time. I've tried different approaches. When I was on my way to get an agent, I tried different things. I did try and write a book completely by the seat of my pants. I had the core idea in mind, and I just kept that at the forefront, on the horizon, and I wrote a full book doing that way. And at the end of it, I looked back and realized the book was terrible. It couldn't be salvaged. It couldn't be saved. So I knew that process wasn't for me. So I developed just over time and by learning, okay, this is what works for me until it doesn't. So that's the other thing I always say to people: find out what works for you in terms of a writing process. And if you get to a point or a book and it doesn't work, don't panic. Adjust and do something differently, and you'll just work it out. But I've only changed my process on one book once. The rest of the time I've done the same process.
And what was that time?
It was The Coward, actually.
It was The Coward.
Yeah, so I work all the way through on a draft. I start at chapter 1 and I work all the way through. I don't jump back and forth. I don't miss chapters out and say, come back to this later. I just keep moving forward. I never edit as I go. If I think of something that's quite a big change, I'll make a note. And once that first draft is done, I'll then go back and work on it. With The Coward, I didn't. I'd start working on things and I'd think of things and I'd go back and I'd make changes on the fly, which, like, sometimes quite big ones, which I never do. But it worked for some reason, and I don't know what was different about that book. So I just thought the process is working. I think the constantly editing thing is, for most people, they're attempting to make it perfect, and they get caught in the editing trap. People get to 20, 30, 40, 50,000 words, and then like, right, I need to polish this and make it better, and then move forward, and they never get past that kind of stumbling block. So I was aware of the trap, but I knew as long as I keep moving forward, this process is fine. And I did meet my deadlines with time to spare, so I knew I could do it. But I think people stumble and get stuck and never get to the end of that first draft because they're trying to make it perfect, which isn't possible. It's only ever done. It's never actually perfect.
Do you think because you so meticulously plan the narrative that even if there's a bit where you feel like you're a bit stuck or it's slowing down, you have something you can set your sights on, so you can kind of just like the big cow catcher on the front of an American train where it just plow through anything? Do you get to fuck it, I know what I'm getting to and I really can't wait to write that bit, so if I just put some more coal in, this thing's going to smash through to the chapter I can't wait to pen? Or is it? I mean, you said you never write something you wouldn't want to read. So do you even hit those bits where you feel like it's a trudge rather than a run?
So writing is my job. It's my career that I'm going to do until basically they put me in the ground. But there are days when it is a job and there is a struggle. No matter, people say, oh, if you do a job you love, you'll never work a day in your life. Of course you will, because there are days when everything else that's going on in your life prevents you from being the best or doing that thing that you love the best possible way. So there are days when I sit down and I can burn off 1,000 words in a couple of hours. Some days it might take me 8 hours. I could still be there at midnight trying to get the words out. There are days when I'll write something and I think, this is absolutely crap, this is awful, but I grind them out, and then the next day or a couple of days later you look back at it and go, actually, it's not too bad. I can see what I was trying to do, or with a few tweaks, actually, that's okay. So there are those days when it's just a struggle, and it is not a case that I need to get to the good chapter. It's a case of, this feels really tiring. It could be that you're just worn out. It could be that you're burnt out and you need a break, which I think is true as well. I think writer's block exists, but I think it's another umbrella term that covers a whole array of things. Figuring out what that is and fixing it and then being able to move forward, I think, is another thing that people have to kind of learn by doing it.
The umbrella term statement is fascinating to me, because I think you are right there, aren't you? Because it does cover things like burnout, it does cover things like lack of purpose, it does cover things like a bad day.
Yeah. I mean, you could be that you've written yourself into a cul-de-sac and that's why you're having some kind of stumbling over your writing. It could be that there's just nothing in the tank. You've been doing it. So I have this weird thing that I think writing is like a muscle. I think the more you do it, the more often that you do it, the easier it kind of becomes, because you get into certain rhythms. And I also think if you take too long a break between writing, then you kind of get like ring rust, you kind of get rust on the muscle, and it takes harder to get back into a rhythm. But I also think that writing is like you have like a petrol tank in your body, essentially. And if you keep doing it all the time and just going at full speed, eventually you will just be running on fumes. And that could be another form of essentially burnout. That you know what the story is. I always know what the story is because I've planned it and I know what I have to write, but I sit down and just nothing happens because I'm just absolutely mentally drained. And that's when you have to kind of take the break. And that's sometimes just having a break is the best way to be able to write. And that sounds awful, but it's true. Like if you're itching to write, if you're desperate to write, then you know you're onto something good. If you're like, oh God, I'm just so tired and I've got to get up at 6 o'clock and if I'm writing till midnight, I've only got, 6 hours sleep, that's not enough. And I've got to work out for an hour before I go to work. So, you just get exhausted. So it's being kind to yourself, I think, is important as well.
Yeah.
I identified with a lot of the things that you just said. And there's been some periods over the last few years, because Nico and I have been writing short stories for this podcast for a while now, and there's a few times just through life that we have had to work a lot in a brief period.
Yeah.
And I think we've been fairly good at being very honest with each other about the fact that sometimes we are running on fumes. And it's always better. We've found from practice basically that it's always better to just push it back a little bit and do it right, and feel like you want to do it rather than have to do it.
Being honest with yourself as well, and knowing that it's like calling it writer's block can make you feel like, oh no, I'm being bad at being a writer. But there are times when all you want to do is write, but you've got a life block. There are if you've got a doctor's appointment at 8 a.m. and then you've got work, and then after work you've already got a meeting for something else booked in, and then you've got to do the laundry, and you've got to cook, and you've got to sleep. And sometimes there just isn't space in a life realistically for writing. If if you've worked hard enough and you've hit that, you've hit your vein of ore, and you get to write as a living. And I say get to like it's a blessing, and it's not difficult anymore. Of course, it's still incredibly hard work, but even then, it can feel like you're time crunched. I get as a touring musician, I get the same thing. People say, "Oh, it must be great because you can just play instruments all day." I say, "No, it's not. That's not how it is." Sometimes you think, I know I only have to do 2 hours, but I don't feel like there is a song left in my soul, because all I can think about is loading the van afterwards and the 6-hour drive we're going to do because we want to be at the next venue early tomorrow. And it's life is the biggest hurdle to having a good life, isn't it?
It's finding time for everything. I think some people also think writers have a time turner from Harry Potter. Like they say, how do you find the time to write? And it's a case of we don't have a secret. There is no silver bullet. It's a case of if you can find time to write, you do it whenever and however you can. I used to write evenings and weekends after work. I would be staying up till midnight. I would be then getting up for work the next day, very, very tired, and do it 5 days a week. And you say, "Oh, I'll catch up asleep on the weekend." Obviously, it doesn't work that way. It's not the cumulative effect, but that's what I would do for the longest time, for years and years and years, because that was the only way to do it. That turned out to be true. It's not an apocryphal story at all. That Peter Brett wrote his Painted Man novel on his phone on the commute to work for basically 2 years. He would type with his thumbs, sit up on a train, an hour into work, an hour back. When he got home at night, he'd type up his notes on his PC, tidy it up, have his life, get up the next day, go to work. And he did that for 2 years or something on his phone every day, because that was the only time he had to write while standing on the train, on the tube in New York. And then eventually it was done and polished and he sent it out and so on. But that was the only way he could do it, because he has a wife and kids and all the rest of it. So that was what he had to do. It's when someone says, "Oh, I've just spent 5 hours watching TV after putting the kids to bed. I haven't got any time to write." I'm like, 5 hours? Just take one of those and do writing.
Binge your own book.
Sacrifice something, but not your health or sleep if possible.
Yeah, that's
So-
a kicker, isn't it? Sleep.
Let's not even start on sleep.
Yeah.
My nemesis. So I am very musically minded, and when I write, I have to have music on, often with words, much to Ben's chagrin. But have you ever, when you're creating a character or a story beat, associated a piece of music strongly with it? You know, like, do your characters have theme tunes, for example?
Not specific characters, no. I always write with music.
Yeah.
It's something I've always done and it works for me. And so I always listen to soundtracks. I can't listen to anything with lyrics whilst I'm writing. So if I'm trying to invoke a particular emotion, I might put on certain tracks, but that could be any character. It depends what's going on in the story.
Yeah.
But I'm always like getting the latest soundtrack of something, film or TV show or something, and thinking that's really good. Like Bear McCreary has written some fantastic
Oh,
music
yeah.
for all the Battlestar
Bear
Galactica
McCreary.
ones.
Yeah.
You know,
Oh,
just
talented
so
dude.
good. He's brilliant. So he's done some fantastic music that I've done in the past. Even something like some of the new music from Andor. I can't remember the name of the composer off the top of my head, but he's done some fantastic things that I just thought, yeah, that works brilliantly. That helps me get into a certain mind space. That's what I'll use.
Yeah.
Underrated show, by the way. Why are so few people talking about how good Andor was?
I've got there's a whole. That's a much longer conversation. Ask me at the next convention at the bar, and I'll tell you.
Yeah.
That's just sorry. I do know who did that. It was Nicholas Brittle that did that, and
There
he
you go.
He also
Yes.
did the stuff for Succession. He did that Timothée Chalamet movie, The King, as well, which I listened to the soundtrack of quite a lot. I think he may have worked on. Oh no, it was Jed Kurzel that did the Macbeth. Yeah, but yeah, that's really interesting to hear that you're in exactly the same vein of soundtracks that I am. I love it.
Blade Runner 2049, Dune
Oh, yeah.
soundtrack, all of this kind of stuff just absolutely feeds me and helps me in that right space. Thomas Newman's done fantastic soundtracks that he did. There's just so many things.
So by the time that this comes out, Dune 2 will have come out. But are you
Yes.
psyched? Are you psyched for Denis Villeneuve's second?
I'm
follow-up
seeing it
first-
tomorrow on opening
Hell-
day, first showing. I'm there.
Absolutely.
I'm going.
Love it.
Can't wait.
It certainly feels like Denis Villeneuve can't miss yet, and I'm going to put this in this recording because I think I'm going to call it. He's absolutely phenomenal. So
he's Blade Runner 2049 was the sequel to a film that nobody really wanted, and it turned out to be the one we all wanted in the end because it did I think it's fantastic. I think it's a spectacular sequel that we didn't even know we wanted. And I think with Dune, he's done the same thing. So everyone talks about how good the Lynch version is, and I don't rate it, especially when the kind of much forgotten sci-fi miniseries that they did was really good.
Yeah.
And then they did the sequel Children of Dune, which was fantastic. And I loved that series because they had the time and the space to do a bit more than just a film. But I think this is by far the best. And Dune is my favorite science fiction novel of all time. So I'm very much invested in this. And I love part one. Part two is coming out. I'm hoping he does get to do a part three, combining books 2 and 3. But we'll see. Depends how much money this makes.
I might be wrong, but I think he might have got the go ahead for that. I think I've.
Hope so.
Maybe...
I hope
it
so.
is greenlit.
Is it greenlit? Yeah.
I know 2 wasn't when he made 1.
Yeah, which is ridiculous, but
after 1 they greenlit 2 and 3.
But there was something funny there, wasn't there? He insisted on calling it Dune Part 1, even though
they told him he wasn't supposed to, and then he just slapped it in the first 15 seconds of the movie.
Yeah,
it's like fuck you, I know this is going to be a hit.
And it was
I remember
incredible.
That I think Ben and I went to see it in the IMAX. I think Ben had already seen it twice at that point.
I did see it 3 times in the first 3 days.
Excellent.
Yeah.
Excellent.
But we went to watch it in the IMAX, and not even the Lord of the Rings movies, the first time I saw them, had me go, so that's probably the end of Act 1. What are we, like an hour? Are those the fucking credits?
Yeah. There is some odd
No.
the time dilation in that movie. Everybody that I've force that movie on, because I have forced it on quite a lot of people. They typically love it, or at least they've lied to me. And then B, they all say that they even though it's an over 3-hour runtime, it feels like it's an hour and a half. It's just, yeah. Anyway, we can probably stop fawning over that movie now, but it's just I'm pretty personally excited because it's coming out this weekend that we're recording this, so it's just on our minds. So
I'm leaving all of this in, even just in case it's like something egregious happens in that movie that none of us were expecting. It's still going to be here. I hope it hasn't, but it would be really funny if people are listening to this like a week on from seeing Dune Part 2 for the first time. They're like, I can't believe they didn't mention insert horrible thing here.
So what is the most like egregious cold shot that we could actually make? Like what would actually ruin this movie for you? Like if, for example, everything was painted Barbie pink, they lost the color grading of the first one entirely. It's all been bollocks.
I think if they invented their own copyrightable planet, they were like, Arrakis is powerful, but have you heard about Barrakis, the water planet, which has twice as much spice per spice?
Or if they get
and then they fight Thanos there or something. I don't fucking know.
Becomes a part of the MCU.
I think if Baron Harkonnen turns up and he says, "Oh, I've been doing a great diet. Look at me now. I'm so slim. Look at my six-pack." What?
If he has a catchphrase where he's like, "It's Harkonnen time."
I'll buy that for $1. You know.
His response to everything is, "My Arrakis, my Dune," but like completely out of context every single time.
Would you like something to eat, Baron? My Arrakis. To eat? What?
Oh yeah, we've called it. We've called it. So hopefully some of those land, or hopefully they don't. But never know.
I also, just to cap it off, the most egregious thing that could happen was if the Disney Studios logo played at the beginning before anything else, because then I'd know it was too late.
It's gone.
I'll tell you what freaked me out the first time I saw it in IMAX is even before the Warner Brothers logo comes up, you hear the music and you hear from the Sada car and that sound that the guy who scored it, I can't remember his name either, but it's so disturbing and so weird and so kind of spooky. That was before anything, just a black screen and that sound came up. And I was like, what the fuck? It was amazing.
Those initial drum hits and the ululating vocal is just deeply unsettling. It's beautiful.
It's Hans Zimmer at the top of his craft, like without a doubt. I did hear that he did something where he scored the whole movie. It was like for free or something. Like
he basically said, "If you ever do this, I'll do it for free." I think Denny he'd said this to Denny years ago because it's one of his favorite books of all time ever. And he basically said to Denny, "If you ever get this, don't ring anybody else, just ring me." And I'm sure he did get paid, but it was kind of, he loved it so much, and so did Denny, and so did everybody else. Denis Villeneuve's attention to detail is ridiculous. So you know how one of the Harkonnen soldiers is deaf in the books?
Yeah.
The actor is deaf who plays him. And I know this because my friend was his British Sign Language assistant on the red carpet for the debut.
Oh, wow.
So they actually got a deaf actor in to play the deaf Harkonnen. So he didn't have to do that. There's no reason he needed to, but he wanted it to feel authentic. He paid that close attention to it. And he walked around with the paperback in his hand all the time. So it's clear that everybody working on this project did it for love behind the scenes. And it just shows in everything for me.
It definitely feels like this generation's Lord of the Rings. I think you were right to mention that earlier, Nico. I think there's that same kind of, like, as you say, attention to detail and love for it that movie required to be made.
It's just, it's nice to watch a movie and feel like people really, really gave a fuck when they made it.
Yeah, but storytelling really matters. Yeah.
Definitely.
Right.
Oh man, we are so far off piste here.
That's okay. Judas Blossom. Yeah. So right.
Judas Blossom. Yeah. So right, I am just going to cold read you one of our questions flat, and then we'll see if we can get back to it.
Do it.
What themes do you find particularly appealing when reading fiction?
When reading fiction, I like revenge stories.
Okay.
I like redemption arcs for people. I like, so there's always there's the farm boy to hero, but I like the other way sometimes, where somebody gradually becomes a villain, and it's not like one day they just kill a bunch of people and become a maniac. It's the kind of 100 steps that are slightly off the path that gradually, and at the end of it, you realize and you go, "Oh God, I've just realized that this person that we've been following, they're not the hero. They've become something terrible." But you don't. So those kind of stories I find quite interesting.
I love that. You mentioned revenge and redemption, and they're often mutually exclusive, aren't they? Because if you have a character that goes for revenge, they do sort of lose something of themselves, typically in a revenge story.
Yeah. There's always the person that's trying to even a score, but at what cost to them personally? They say they're doing it for the right reasons, but how far do they have to go before they become something else? Before they become something that they, if they were able to step back from themselves, will no longer recognize? So things like that really interest me. I like police procedurals. Weirdly, I don't understand quite why. Maybe it was just growing up watching lots of cop shows as a kid. But I like that procedural aspect, and I read some books like that, and I watch a lot more TV like that.
So, looking at my notes, what I have here is Breaking Bad. I think that seems to be your alley, right?
With the because
We've got some procedural policing. We've got some
someone from
heroes and
good side
villains.
going to the villain, gradually bit by bit.
And what fascinating study of that, by the way, that show. This is going to become a TV and movie podcast at this rate. Never before has a character done so much wrong with me being like, "You get him, go on. I'm still on your side, you awful bastard."
I think one of the best character evolutions on TV, this will probably completely surprise you, is Wesley Wyndham-Pryce from Buffy and then Angel.
Oh, interesting.
Are you old enough to remember these shows?
Yeah. Well, barely, but yeah, just about. I think I haven't watched it since I was a kid either. But so Wesley was like the boyfriend of Willow. Is that
no?
Wesley?
So he turns up in Buffy as the backup watcher, the kind of very stiff English guy in a suit who's there to guide and train Buffy, but he has no real experience. He has terrible people skills. He's a complete coward. He has knowledge, but he doesn't know what to do, and in a fight he's completely useless. And she's at this point way more experienced than him and knows what to do, and he's trying to exert his authority, and it just completely fails, and it just falls over completely. But then, over a few years he gets a little bit better. Then the show ends, and then he went across to Angel. Actually, there was no overlap, but he went to Angel, and he's now in LA trying to be a demon hunter, but he's still completely inept. He still has no training. He's still quite poor with people, but he still knows a lot. And gradually over the course of the show, he evolves and things happen to him that make him a much darker character. He becomes a lot more grey. He goes through some terrible experiences that leave physical, mental marks on him. But he's always driven still by this desire to do good and to help people. And by the end of the show, I don't want to spoil it, but at the end of the series, the end of the whole show, he's changed so much that he became my favourite character. And he started off as this completely bumbling fool that everybody laughed at because he was a joke.
Do you think there's a lot of, I mean, this is a bit of a silly question really, but do you think there is, for yourself, a lot of crossover between the kind of media you imbibe and the stories that they tell, so for example, TV shows, movies, and then that then goes into your writing? Like, what's the sort of like fulcrum there? Like, how do you translate these things into your own storytelling?
There's definitely overlap. Yeah, there's definitely overlap, but it can, some of the best character arcs I've seen have taken place on TV over the span of several years, sometimes, many, many years and seasons. In books, yes, there are long-running long-running series with characters that do evolve over time. The longest one that I'm currently reading is probably still the Dresden Files, like 18 books on, 20 years, we've seen the characters change. But if you look at something like Robin Hobb and you look at her Assassin's Apprentice books and the Realm of the Underlings, I've not even finished them yet, but I'm taking my time. But look at how much the character of Fitz has changed over the course of of that. So I think it's all of these things in place gradually trickling through, especially something like Babylon 5 played a massive role in shaping how characters can evolve and change over time, that they don't always start at black and go to white, or vice versa. That, you know, people are so grey and so muddy and mixed, and reading lots of Gemmell growing up helped with that as well, because a lot of the time they're people, ordinary people, usually quite grey, put in extraordinary circumstances trying to do their best. And people now say, oh, grimdark, blah, 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 and so started it. I'm thinking, I don't think they did. I think you go back in every generation, there's an equivalent of grimdark. And for me, the first one that I read, beyond the kind of David Eddings clean-cut stuff, was the Gemmells. I mean, even Terry Brooks, as much as I love his books, they're very kind of black and white in terms of good and evil.
Yeah.
It wasn't until I got to Gemmell as a teenager and thought, this guy's terrible, but he's the main character. But he's a killer, but he's doing good things. Oh, how do I feel about this?
Oh, I just get a little warmth in my heart every time someone mentions Robin Hobb in a positive light on this podcast.
She's lovely.
It's
I've met her in person, and she's a lovely lady.
brilliant. I'm so glad to hear that. I've only ever heard her speak,
no
but yeah, I'd love to meet her at some point.
Spent time with her at a French book festival that we went to.
Oh, lovely. Do you do a lot? Do you do a lot of festivals? Do you travel around?
That one, I was invited to that one by the French. So my first trilogy is translated into French and German, and the French publisher, I won an award in France for Battle Mage, and because of that, I was then invited to attend this French festival. It was myself, Ed MacDonald, R.J. Barker, Stephen Aryan was there, Robin Hobb was there. And I'm forgetting some other authors, but there was sort of 10 Brits and Americans, and then about 40 European authors at this festival. And that was just a phenomenal experience, getting to spend time with them and meet the fans. Oh, and Christopher Priest, sorry. This is hilarious. So when you weren't doing panels, you were encouraged to be at the signing table. And I was sat between Christopher Priest and Stephen Aryan for 3 days. I thought, okay, there's going to be huge queues, and I'm going to be the numpty in the middle with no one turning up. But as it turned out, a lot of French fans did come and pick up my books, for which I was absolutely very surprised and absolutely pleased by. It was just a fantastic experience.
Oh, I'm so glad that happened for you. That's brilliant. So we've had like what your favorite themes are, and like what you try to imbue in your writing. But are there any tropes that you actively avoid, that you just sort of like I don't want any of that?
No, because I think you can take what people take as think of as a trope and do something new with it, or do something different with it. I think old can be made new. I think anything can be reshaped. Even if someone says, I'm going to have halflings or hobbits or whatever you want to call them in my book, you can do something new with that and make them creepy and disturbing and weird. So I think a lot of people of my generation perhaps initially took their lead from people like Tolkien, as if he was the right way to do it.
Bible, yeah.
Yeah, and it's not the case. He took inspiration from certain European folklore, but that was just one stripe. There's lots of other varieties, and it wasn't until reading somebody like Tad Williams in my late teens that I thought, okay, he's looked at things and done it differently. Why does it have to be that way? And of course, it didn't. So there isn't anything that I wouldn't say I'd actively avoid. It'd be okay if I'm putting this trope in. If I'm doing the farm boy goes on a quest, how can I do it different that we haven't seen 500 times before?
Yeah. This is actually just a bit behind the curtain here. Sorry, Nico, to cut across you, but this is actually a question that we're considering dropping, because you answered it beautifully and eloquently, and you had a great outlook there. But virtually every single author that we speak to has that outlook, because we're talking to storytellers, and storytellers want to put their own spin on things. So it's almost like it's a challenge, isn't it? If there's a trope that people have typically mishandled, it's become a bit of a dull tool. It's almost quite exciting to buff it up and sharpen it.
I think the only one that generally gets kicked back is fridging. A lot of people are, that's one. I think that, and the the sort of superhero gay best friend, they're things that I think a lot of people are wary of rather than actively avoiding. But I think that's part of the times. It's It's where things have been mishandled. Maybe some people are trying to be more progressive and not doing it particularly well. But if that's the case, then really it shouldn't be about not using them. It's just about utilizing them better and finding the way to get more broad voices into your narrative in a way that is respectful and interesting. I think that's the big part, isn't it? Making these things not feel like someone's hammered it in at the end because it was missing, and more like it's part of that world, it's part of that story.
Woven in. Yeah.
Yeah. It's that thing of, if you're going to do it, are you doing it just for shock value, or is there a purpose behind it? Harming a loved one in order to motivate a character to go and do something, essentially, has been done many, many times. It's not that I wouldn't say you should actively avoid it. If there's a reason, if it's a vital part of the story, and if you can't think of another way to do it that isn't just the same old, then I would look at it. But it's that thing of, what kind of a story are you going to tell? And putting that aside, if you're doing a certain kind of story, some things are going to crop up naturally. It's part of the landscape. Like if you do a war book, there's going to be killing. So actively avoiding that, how would you do it? And also the question will be, why would you do it? In which case, why are you writing a war book? So it's motivation and context and making it appropriate to the situation, really. Being truthful to the situation, if you like.
I do like that idea of finding the truth in it. It works. I think maybe for the Phrygian one, another thing is that it's just it relies on the passivity of the main character. It's something that's happening to them. Which, I don't know. It can just be a little bit difficult to make a reactive character a main character. I sometimes find, anyway. So what's your next project? What are you working on next, if you can speak about it?
So at the moment, I'm in the middle of this trilogy, The Nightingale and the Falcon. This is historic fantasy. I wanted to do something different again, and I wanted to test myself, and it was extremely difficult. It's the most challenging series that I've done so far. So book 1, The Judas Blossom, came out last July. This July 2024, book 2, The Blood-Dim Tide, will come out. So it's completely done, polished, edited, proofed. It's all done now. Advanced reader copies will be going out for that soon. Book 3 in the trilogy has a title. It has been written. So this year I will be editing book 3, doing various revisions and redrafts of that with my editor. But I am also writing something completely new at the moment, not connected to anything I've done before. And I'm about 30k into the book.
That's an interesting benchmark to be at, isn't it? 30k. That's sort of, it's deep enough in that you're in. But sort of also there's still loads of scope and room to move.
Yes, I'm still enjoying it as well. I haven't got to the phase where I hate it, which usually happens with every book that I'm writing. That thing of, I don't know how to write, I've forgotten how to do this, I don't like this. I have that with pretty much every single book I write, but I haven't got to that with this one, which is interesting, and I'm still having a lot of fun with it. I'm doing something different again. I'm stretching different muscles. I'm trying out new things within the framework that I've built, and I'm still having a great time with it. So I will be writing that this year and then talking to my publisher about it and see if they're interested in it later in this year.
I wish you all the best for it. Absolutely.
You're making me feel like I've got to start doing more planning, because everything sounds so. Maybe you're just confident and you speak well, but it sounds like everything's so streamlined and ready, and you.
It's only if it works for you. I mean, it depends if it works for you. So look, RJ Barker, who's a friend, he doesn't plan his books to that degree. He has, I think you've spoken to him. He
a couple of
has an idea. He has an idea of what he's doing, where he's going, but he doesn't do the detailed planning that I do. And there are some authors that I know that do even more detailed plotting than me. Like they have, every single beat of every single chapter broken down in a list of bullet points. Their kind of planning document could be like 70,000 words before they start writing. For me, that's too dry. That would be, there's no creativity, there's no jump, there's no discovery. I'm still partially discovering things as I go. So it's finding what on the spectrum works for you, really.
Oh, beautiful. It's been fantastic talking to you. I keep swinging wildly, and I'll be brutally honest here, between just pure admiration and abject jealousy. You have an amazing career, and you have a beautiful outlook on writing and storytelling, and
Thank you.
it's so exciting what you're doing with it. And I feel like that's exactly what human beings should be doing with their lives, from my perspective. So, really love to see it. So I'm going to be doing this, so I want the people listening to be doing it as well. But where should we all go to keep up to date with your news? Do we go to your website? Should we go to a social media channel?
The best place to start as on my website, it's just stephen-aryan.com. You can subscribe to my pre-monthly newsletter on there, where once a month I send out what's going on, where I'm going to be, upcoming events, news about the books, that kind of stuff. There are a lot of UK events this year that I'm going to be attending in person, so I'll be out and about doing there. Instagram's probably the best place to find me as well. I'm on Twitter, but only kind of every now and then posting updates or chatting with friends. I also have a YouTube channel where I post writing advice videos, and I started it during lockdown because I missed attending events and I missed talking to other authors. So I did it as a way to do that. And so I've got like 50 or 60 author interviews on there where I talk to them about, how they got to where they are now, how they got into writing, where did they start with telling stories. And it's just useful for people to hear other ways of, like you do with this, about how to write. There isn't one right way to do it. There's just whatever works for you. And so just Google me on YouTube as well, and you can find me on there. But in person this year, I'm going to be at EasterCon in Telford at the end of March, start of April. I'm going to be at Glasgow WorldCon in August, and I'm going to be at FantasyCon in Chester in October.
We are probably going to be there as well, so
okay.
may bump into you.
So
wonderful.
That's a conversation about Andor at the bar then.
I've done a long video on YouTube. Watch that, and then we'll have a conversation.
Okay, good. I love homework. I love it.
You got homework. You got a 2-part homework video to watch. There you go.
Well, thank you so much for your time and for your brilliant words on writing. I've really personally enjoyed it, and I hope everybody else has really enjoyed it as well.
And we'll be back soon with more stories and more lovely guest authors like Stephen today. Don't forget that we are now available on YouTube. So if you want something to put on in the background, every subscribe helps. So once you subscribe to Stephen, come and subscribe to us with a tiny bookcase there, like we are everywhere else. Love you.
Thanks for joining us for this episode of The Tiny Bookcase.
Remember to subscribe, otherwise you're going to miss out on the future fun.
Also, tell a friend. If you like this episode, link them to it.
We'd be tremendously grateful. You can follow us on Twitter at BookcaseTiny, Facebook at The Tiny Bookcase, and Instagram at BookcaseTiny for updates. Speaking of supporting the podcast, well, magic can only take one so far. The Tiny Bookcase is supported by the generosity of its patrons. Those kind souls have really kept my belly full the last year. Let's cast a spell for them, shall we? For rich ginger tones on their scalp, let us cast the Orangi Hedondo spell for Scott Byrne. And for general fabulousness, why not the Ooh La La, How's Your Mother spell on Matthew McLaren?
How do you come up with that shit, man?